For this demo, we'll be using a stack of post-it notes as our pre-made flipbook structure. The first step in planning out our flipbook is figuring out what our drawing area is. This stack of post-it notes is 3 inches by 3 inches and has 50 pages. I'm flipping through the pages just to get a sense for how much of each page I can actually see. Turns out it's about half a page, so my drawing area is about 1.5 by 3 inches. The next step is to figure out what the image is that I'm going to be working from. I recommend working from a video of the figure so that you can have a frame-by-frame reference for your drawings. For this demo, I've decided to work with the last few seconds of this movement. Keep in mind that with your flipbook, you'll only be able to cover about 2 to 3 seconds of movement. I'll want to spend some time doing some gesture sketches of the figure, and then establish what I want my first and last frame to be. Once I've done my sketches and feel comfortable with how I'm going to represent the figure, I can start on my drawing. In order to track how movement is changing from frame to frame, we're actually going to start with the last frame of our book. I'm sketching everything out in pencil so I can make sure I have my figure and any other relevant information exactly where I want it. In this case, I just have the figure and the pull-up bar, and I want to make sure that I can see both in this 1.5 inch by 3 inch frame that I've given myself to work within. Once I'm comfortable with the gesture sketch I've drawn in with pencil, I'm going to go in with pen and slightly refine these marks. You'll notice that I'm keeping everything pretty loose and still very gestural. In order to create some believable motion, I want to simplify the body into a couple key lines that I can very easily adjust from frame to frame. This drawing represents the impression of the figure rather than the exact likeness. After I have my very last frame done, I'm actually going to trace it on the next 2 to 3 pages. Because of the structure of flipbooks, sometimes the first few and last few pages get skipped over as you're flipping through. So for this reason, I like to have a buffer at the beginning and end where my frames repeat themselves. I'm not making any changes to my frames yet. Because I've drawn in pen, I can really clearly see from one page to the next and get a pretty accurate copy of these 3 pages. Now that I have that 3-page buffer in, I'm going to slowly start making changes from frame to frame. Every frame in this book is going to have the pull-up bar in the exact same spot. I've tried to keep my representation of it fairly simple. Even if there's some variation from frame to frame, cumulatively, this pull-up bar will appear relatively stable. As for the figure, I've selected a new reference frame in my video that's just a fraction of a second off from my last frame. I can use this reference as a guide for creating slight changes in gesture to the arms, legs, and head. Again, you can see that I'm keeping things relatively simple. I'm not really using any light or shadow, but instead focusing on creating the figure through line. I can flip back and forth between these pages to make sure I'm starting to go in the right direction, and then select a new frame in my reference video and repeat the process on the next page. Because I can see through to the previous frame, I can use that as a guide to keep the changes that I'm making to this drawing gradual so that there aren't too many big jumps in the motion of the figure. With each new frame, I'm spending some time with my reference video to really pay attention to what parts of the body are moving. Are the arms moving, the legs, the head, and really starting to anticipate where this drawing is going next from frame to frame. I'll repeat this process for about 10 frames and then double check my work by taking a moment to flip through the book. I want to check my work periodically to make sure that the pacing is right and to keep an eye out for any big jumps in movement that don't make sense. When it comes to pacing, slighter movements from frame to frame will make the figure appear to move slower. More drastic changes will make the figure appear to move faster. In my drawing, I'm hoping to create the illusion that the figure drops fairly quickly, but then the movement slows down as she hits the ground, kind of bounces back up. I'm keeping that pacing goal in mind as I'm moving from frame to frame, and as I'm preparing to get into these frames where the figure is actually dropping off of the pull-up bar, my movements will become a little bit more drastic from frame to frame. I'm also not too worried about making a mistake. We're moving so quickly through these pages as we flip through them that often a mark that I would deem a mistake on a single frame gets totally absorbed into the overall movement, and we don't really catch it as we're flipping through. Since we're working with post-it notes, if I do end up making a page that really doesn't make sense within the entire moving image, I can always just remove that post-it note and replace it with a fresh page. I'm going to continue in this way, slowly advancing my reference video to the next frame, making my new drawing, and checking my progress every 10 or so pages until I've worked through almost all of the 50 pages in my flipbook. I've skipped at this point many pages of drawing, and we're here at my very last frame. As I'd planned from the beginning, I wanted my first frame to be the figure somewhere in the beginning of her pull-up, and the last frame to be her landing back on the ground. One thing that I'm noticing as I'm flipping through is that I missed that first 3-page buffer, so we're not quite getting the effect of the figure starting her pull-up. So I'm going to add 3 additional pages and just repeat that first frame 3 times. This buffer should hopefully allow us to see the full range of movement from the first frame to the very last frame. After completing these 50 plus pages, we have a flipbook that uses the gestural drawing of the figure to create the illusion of movement.